Before we begin, imagine waking up before the sun rises, not in your own bed, not in your own home. You wake up on a stone floor, in a city that does not consider you a person. You have no name that matters, no rights, no future that belongs to you. You are property. You are a tool. And today, like every day before it, you will be used. This is not a story from a movie. This is not fiction. This happened every single day to millions of real human beings in the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever seen. This is 24 hours as a slave in ancient Rome. It begins before dawn. The city of Rome is still dark. The streets are quiet. The wealthy are still sleeping in their grand villas, wrapped in fine linen, dreaming of politics and power. But for the slave, the day has already started. You are up before your master. That is the rule. That has always been the rule. Before he opens his eyes, his water must be heated. His food must be prepared. His house must be clean. His sandals must be polished and waiting by his bed. You do not eat yet. You do not rest. You work. The Roman household ran entirely on slave labor. Historians estimate that at the height of the Roman Empire, between 30 and 40% of the entire population of Italy were slaves. Think about that number. 1 in 3 people you would pass on the street in ancient Rome was owned by someone else. And these were not all people who had been born into slavery. Many of them had been free just years before. Soldiers captured in war, families torn apart when Rome conquered their homeland. People who had lived normal lives with homes and children and futures, and then one day Rome arrived and everything changed. The morning routine begins. If you are a household slave, a slave who works inside the home of a wealthy Roman, your morning is a carefully choreographed performance. Every task has an order, every movement has a purpose, and every mistake has a consequence. The Romans called household slaves familia urbana, the urban family, and in some wealthy households there were hundreds of them, each one assigned a specific role. There were slaves whose only job was to wake the master, slaves whose only job was to hand him his clothes, slaves whose only job was to taste his food before he ate it, to make sure it wasn't poisoned. Yes, there were slaves whose entire existence was to risk dying so their master didn't have to. But not every slave lived in a wealthy Roman villa. Not every slave had a roof over their head or food guaranteed every day. Because Roman slavery was not one thing, it was many things. And some of those things were far darker than others. There were levels to Roman slavery, and the difference between them was the difference between a difficult life and a living nightmare. At the top, if you could call it that, were the educated slaves, the Greeks. Rome had conquered Greece and discovered something unexpected. The people they had enslaved were often more educated than the Romans themselves. So Greek slaves became teachers, doctors, philosophers, accountants. Some of them became so trusted, so indispensable, that they lived almost like free men. Almost. Because no matter how educated you were, no matter how trusted, no matter how valuable, you were still property. Your master could sell you tomorrow, could separate you from your children, could punish you for any reason or no reason at all. The law was not on your side. The law didn't even see you as human. Below the educated slaves were the domestic workers, the cooks, the cleaners, the personal attendants. Their lives were hard, but predictable. They knew what was expected of them. They knew the rhythms of the household. And if they were lucky, if their master was reasonable, they might be treated with a degree of humanity. But below them were the ones who worked the mines, the quarries, the farms. And for them, there was almost no hope at all. The mines of ancient Rome were places so terrible that being sent to them was considered a death sentence in slow motion. Slaves in the silver mines of Spain worked in tunnels so narrow they could barely crawl, in complete darkness, in suffocating heat, breathing air thick with toxic dust. They worked in chains, they slept in the tunnels, they rarely saw sunlight, and most of them did not live long. The Roman writer Diodorus Siculus described what he saw in these mines. The slaves worked without rest, without mercy, their bodies deteriorating day by day. Death was not feared in these places. For many, it was welcomed. This was not an accident. This was not cruelty for its own sake. This was economics. Roman slaves in the mines were worked until they died because it was cheaper to replace them than to take care of them. New slaves were always available. New conquests were always happening. The supply never stopped. And Rome knew it, and Rome did not care. Back in the city, the day moves forward. By mid-morning, the streets of Rome are alive. The markets are open. The forum is busy. And slaves are everywhere, carrying goods, delivering messages, accompanying their masters through the crowded streets like living furniture. If you were a slave accompanying your master through Rome today, you walk behind him, always behind, never beside. You carry what he needs, you clear the path when necessary, you are invisible until you are needed. And the moment you are needed, you had better be there. Because the punishment for failing your master in public was humiliation at best, and something far worse at worst. Roman law gave masters almost unlimited power over their slaves. A master could beat his slave for any reason, could brand them, could chain them. For most of Rome's history, a master could kill his slave without facing any legal consequences whatsoever. You were not a person under Roman law. You were an instrument. The Latin word was instrumentum vocale, a talking tool. That is what the law called you, not a human being, a tool that happened to be able to speak. By afternoon, the work continues. In a wealthy Roman household, the afternoon brings new tasks. The master may be entertaining guests for dinner tonight. And a Roman dinner party was not a simple meal. It was a performance, a display of wealth and power. And the slaves were the ones who made that performance possible. The kitchen slaves have been working since before dawn preparing the food, multiple courses, exotic ingredients, dishes designed to impress. The serving slaves are being briefed on the order of service. The entertainment slaves, musicians and dancers, are rehearsing. The door slaves are preparing to greet the guests. Every single element of this evening, this one evening of pleasure for a handful of wealthy Romans, requires the coordinated labor of dozens of human beings who will receive nothing in return. No thanks, no rest afterward, no recognition. Tomorrow, the same thing begins again. But here is something Rome did not want you to know. The slaves knew what was happening to them. They were not passive. They were not broken. Many of them resisted in the only ways available to them. Working slowly, pretending not to understand instructions, hiding food, helping other slaves escape, passing information between households through the invisible network that existed below the surface of Roman society. And sometimes the resistance was not quiet at all. Spartacus. In 73 BC, a Thracian slave and gladiator named Spartacus led a rebellion that shook the Roman Empire to its core. Starting with just 70 men who escaped from a gladiator school in Capua, his army grew to over 100,000 slaves. For 2 years, they defeated Roman army after Roman army. 2 years against the most powerful military force in the ancient world. Rome was terrified, not just because of the military threat, but because of what it meant. It meant the slaves were not content. It meant the foundation Rome had built its entire civilization on was unstable, was angry, was human. Spartacus was eventually defeated. His army was crushed by the Roman general Crassus. And to send a message to every slave in the empire, 6,000 of Spartacus's followers were crucified along the Appian Way, the main road into Rome. Rome wanted every slave who entered that road to understand one thing. This is what happens when you fight back. As the sun begins to set over Rome, the dinner party is underway. The guests are reclining on their couches, the wine is flowing, the food is arriving course by course, and the slaves are moving silently through the room like ghosts, present but invisible, working but unacknowledged. The guests talk about politics, about philosophy, about the greatness of Rome, about freedom, about virtue, about what it means to live a good life. And the slaves pour their wine and say nothing. Late at night, when the guests have gone home and the master is asleep, the slave finds a corner of the floor, a thin blanket if they're lucky, and they close their eyes. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again over Rome, the greatest city in the ancient world, built on marble and ambition and the labor of millions of people who never chose to be there. And before that sun is fully up, the slave will already be working. This was not an exception. This was not a dark chapter that Rome was ashamed of. This was the system. This is how the empire functioned. Every road, every temple, every aqueduct, every triumph, every speech about Roman greatness was built on this, on them, on people who woke up every morning in a world that did not see them as human and somehow kept going anyway. If this video made you think differently about ancient Rome, hit subscribe, because next time we go even deeper. See you in the next one.